But first, I think it was Harold Wilson who once said a week is a long time in politics. Well, someone you know and know very well has discovered you could probably bring that down to 48 hours. I refer to my long-standing colleague, and I hope I can say friend, Iain Dale, who just a few days ago bade farewell.
Now, this isn't a moment I saw coming until just a few days ago, but I need to let you know that this will be my last show on LBC for the foreseeable future, and I want to explain why. You know how much politics means to me, and if you've listened for any length of time, you know I've always had two ambitions in life. One was to be a radio presenter, and the other was to be an MP. Now I'm putting my hat in the ring again to be a candidate at the general election. Whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, however often you listen, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your loyalty. I'm going to go, I knew I would, for your loyalty, your calls, your messages and friendship over the last 15 years. This is the best job I've ever had.
And just 48 hours or so later, it had a turn of events. Iain Dale is in the studio with me. Good to see you, my friend. Let's start. What persuaded you to go for it in the first place?
Well, even when Greg Clark, the MP for Tunbridge Wells, said he was standing down on Friday lunchtime last week, it never occurred to me to do this. It was only later in the day that I kept getting messages and people saying, oh, you're being talked about as a future candidate.
Messages from?
From people in Tunbridge Wells. And so I started to think about it. Even Friday night, I was still 70-30 against doing it. Talked to a lot of people on Saturday, and eventually came to the conclusion that, well, it's now or never. As I said in that clip, I'd always wanted to do it. But leaving here, look, you've been here longer than I have. We both think this is the best job that we've ever had. So it was a really difficult decision to make. But once I'd made it, I was very comfortable with it. I wasn't sort of thinking, oh, God, what have I done? But as you say, things then took a bit of a turn.
What's gone wrong?
Well, on Wednesday morning, so literally less than 12 hours after I'd done that little speech on Tuesday evening, I got a text from the local Conservative Party saying that they had had a communication from the Liberal Democrats with this clip from the For the Many podcast from 2 years ago, in which I had said, and of course I hadn't remembered this at all, in which I had said that I didn't like living in Tunbridge Wells and I'd quite happily live somewhere else. Now, I instantly recognised the problems with that. There is a context to it, but nobody's interested in context or nuance in these situations. You just have that little clip, and that would be on every single Lib Dem leaflet that was put out in the election campaign.
When did you say that?
2 years ago. It was after, do you remember Rishi Sunak came to Tunbridge Wells and talked about transferring levelling up funds to richer areas?
Yes.
And Jackie and I were having a discussion on this on the podcast. And we'd always had this sort of banter between us about I would take the mickey out of Redditch, where she was MP for back in the day, and she would sort of take the mickey out of Tunbridge Wells. So there was a bit of a history here. And so we said that. And then I started talking about that there actually were areas, or there are areas of deprivation in Tunbridge Wells and sort of pockets of poverty. It's not sort of the leafy, well, by and large it is quite a rich area, but there are problems. But of course, that wouldn't be on the Lib Dem leaflet.
No.
And then I thought to myself, well, if they've got this on day one, I mean, I've done thousands of hours on LBC over the last 15 years. I've done hundreds of hours in podcasts. I actually had said to the local party and the national party that there were inevitably things that I've said, particularly in the last year, where I've criticised Conservative policy, the Rwanda policy, for example. And I think I would have got through that. But this sort of thing is something on a different level.
And you couldn't remember 2 years ago, Iain? Well, I mean, it was like, I think you've been here 14 years or something like that. I mean, 2 years ago?
Well, I think, look, I had 48 hours to make my mind up as to whether to do this. And I thought I'd gone through all of the pros and the cons, but I didn't take into account sort of that kind of comment.
But why not tough it out?
Why not tough it out? Because, and several people have said that I should be doing that.
Like who?
Well, I'm not going to go into all the people I've talked to,
but people within the party.
People, yeah, sort of friends, MPs, people locally, people nationally. But I decided on Wednesday evening, about 5:30, that I would ask them not to put my name on the shortlist. Now, I don't know whether they would have done anyway, but that was a decision that I took. People I've talked to since have said, why didn't you tough it out? I could have gone to the selection meeting tomorrow. I could have done a rah, rah, rah speech and sort of got them all whipped up and said, we'll beat these Lib Dems, blah, blah, blah. And I could have won. But what if they'd got something else that I've said? And this is not the first time this has happened to a radio presenter. Our former colleague, Nick Conrad, in the 2019 election, he was selected and something that he had said was, and so he had to go. And I probably should have taken a lesson from that in some ways. But I wasn't willing to suffer death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, imagine if the day before nominations closed next week that they'd found something else that was even worse than this.
Right, okay.
And I don't know what that would be, but they could have done.
So it was a difficult decision to go forward because you loved working here at LBC.
Yeah.
Equally difficult to withdraw your name?
Well, it was, but it was one of those things, once you make the decision, you know you've done the right thing.
Some would say you're frit.
They can say what they like. People will say. People have already said a lot about me. I mean, you know what. I mean, I know you don't do social media to the extent that I do.
I don't at all. Because I know I'd last half an hour.
I mean, I haven't actually looked at a lot of it over the past 48 hours, but I know. I mean, this is the only statement I'm going to make on this. I'm not going to do any other interviews. I'm not going to write anything. Obviously, people can throw that accusation at me that I'm a frit, but I think I've recognised the political reality, and I don't want to do anything that would damage sort of whoever is chosen.
Have you met ordinary folk of Tunbridge Wells? You know, if someone in your newsagents or walking down the street or at the railway station, have anybody commented to you?
I've had a couple of emails. I mean, the one thing I will say is I have had so many emails and tweets from LBC listeners sort of saying, really, really sorry that you're going, even if I'm not a Conservative, good luck in the election. I want to thank them for that because it has meant an awful lot.
What is life like in Tunbridge Wells?
I've lived there for 27 years.
It's because of your partner,
yeah,
isn't it?
And I would say, if I hated it that much, would I have stayed living there for 27 years? I don't think I would. In many ways, it is a lovely place. But look, where you live, I'm sure over the years, Nick, you've said, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Yeah. Well, part of the reason I got so angry in that clip was that the road into Tunbridge Wells that I use most days had been dug up for 3 months.
Right.
And I think around that time it caused me to miss quite an important medical appointment.
Okay.
A friend of mine had been mugged in the town centre. So everybody listening to this now will have some complaint about where they live. I just put it in far too graphic terms.
What have you learned about Iain Dale from this process?
I've learned that I possibly should take longer to make an important decision, because this was a really important decision for me. I mean, it was an absolute wrench to do that on Tuesday night and say goodbye. And I think I've got to take a little bit of time now.
I was going to ask, what next for Iain Dale?
Well, I think I've got to take time to reflect on that, because I've made the mistake of making a decision without probably thinking about every possible consequence. So it would be a bit silly to do the same again, wouldn't it?